Welcome to part 3 of our secondary systems series. This last one is where we're going to check in on, are the interventions working? So by interventions, I don't just mean that additional period or time in a student's day where we're looking to accelerate, but are we starting to see across the student's day, is the work that the team is doing, interventionists, core teachers, all of us together, is that working and providing success for our students? So the first part that we've done in this series was that clear definition of what an intervention is, that it has that evidence base. The second part was making sure that we had the right students in the right intervention. So those students who are already in our schools and using that assessment funnel to be able to decide what assessments we use in order to help place a student into the correct intervention. And then also having the system clear with your rising students coming into your school. So this third section now is what we do as students are in interventions, the assessments that we use, and then how we start to make decisions to determine this question, is it working? And again, is what we are doing as a team working to be able to provide success for our students. So the first part is, much of this might be review from what we talked about earlier as we spoke in November around our assessment systems. So we'll start to think about progress monitoring data. And the one piece I forgot again is, my name is Dean Richards from Metis Education Group, and we are providing technical assistance for these trainings. So when we think about progress monitoring, it is a very specific type of assessment. And that is this idea that it is brief, frequent, and standardized. It's certainly, and please, please, please use multiple measures in order to help us make decisions about our students who are in interventions. But it is really important to have this brief, frequent, and standardized assessment. We're looking at these general outcome measure types of assessments, broad assessments to see if students are applying the skills that we are teaching them. We will also want to use those mastery assessments, those classroom assessments, the ones that are more based on standards and that reflect the I taught it, did they learn it? And we want to be able to compare that to the standardized measure that tells us, well, where is the student as compared to lots of other students? A mastery assessment doesn't tell us that. It only compares them to other students within that class. It may not even be between classes, because a student might say in one class, I need help on question 7, and they might receive it, and in the next class they would not, or even within the same period. So mastery assessments are an important component of our assessment system, but having a progress monitoring system is going to be a really important component. So when we start to think about what are we going to measure, this slide brings us back to the idea from part 1 of, if we have students, we have all students who are receiving that instruction, those students are not going to be progress monitored, but those students who are in interventions, we're looking here at that word level, or that within that meaning level side of instruction. So we target our assessments in the same way that we are targeting our instruction. So if we are intervening in the word level, then we'll use one set of particular pieces of progress monitoring, versus if we're looking at the comprehension or vocabulary, the meaning side, then we would use another. So again, progress monitoring is like this idea of stepping on the scale. And I've used this analogy in November when the group was together. And that is that every time that we step on the scale, that scale starts at 0. So if you stepped on the scale and it was at 0, and then the next time you step on the scale, you move it back 5 pounds, you'd say, wow, look, I just lost 5 pounds. But those are not equivalent forms. And so progress monitoring assessments have multiple and equivalent forms. So, and it's standardized. At 0 it means 0 no matter where we are in the world, no matter what time of day it is, all of those things. We start at 0 and then weigh from there. So having multiple and equivalent forms over time helps us weigh ourselves and to determine that progress of our students on this general outcome measure. Now, weight isn't the only thing that tells us whether we're healthy or not, but it is one of those measures that we can use that will help us to determine that. So again, having mastery assessments, very, very important. Using multiple types of assessments is even better. And having this standardized assessment that compares the weights to lots of other kids, compares that assessment to lots of other students, is what's going to be really important about our progress monitoring assessments. So that progress monitoring really gives us the ability to do several of these things. So we can start to look at that rate of improvement. That's what that ROI stands for on the bottom left-hand side. So we're able to look at that rate of improvement over time. So against the same measure each time. That then allows us to be able to look at that effectiveness of the instruction. So our students taking the skills that we're teaching them and generalizing them to other contexts. So versus the mastery assessments, that are they using that particular skill at that particular time? So if a student is not making that adequate progress as compared to other students, then we have that information and can then make some instructional change as needed and start to figure out maybe, well, what's happening and why. So that progress monitoring data, that standardized piece, gives us that rate of improvement, because the mastery assessments, chapter 1 may be more difficult or more easier than chapter 2. And so, again, important, but a different type of assessment altogether when we think about progress monitoring. The other piece around progress monitoring is that idea that they're brief and frequent. So, but we want to be able to really tie that brief and frequent progress monitoring data to whatever it is that we're looking at for our students. So if we're working on that accuracy and decoding for students, we would give that oral reading fluency passage, but we're going to look at the accuracy percentage. Are students reading more words correctly? If we're focusing on that fluency, which again still falls under that word level piece, we're going to be looking at their rate. So are they starting to free up some of that mental capacity to increase the rate of their understanding of the words? So we have that the rate on the oral reading fluency passage. So that would look something like this, where we start to see how many words they've read, how many of those words did they read correctly. If we're working on the meaning level, then that would mean that we are going to use a maze passage instead. And so a maze passage is where every 7th word is substituted with a choice of 3 words, and students have to use their understanding of the text to select the correct words. So if we're focused on accuracy, fluency at the word level, we're just going to give the oral reading fluency. That's going to be all that's necessary. Well, because we'll have other pieces of information as well, but the only standardized progress monitoring measure is that one piece. If we're working in that other group of students who are at the meaning level, then we can use the maze assessment to help us determine, are students generalizing their meaning structures and using those into a new text. We also do have these within mathematics. So there is companies like AimsWeb have MCAP and MComp, where we're starting to look at the ability for students to apply those pieces of information. And then there are also, for the high school mathematics, Ann Fagan, who is at Iowa State University, has created some algebra foundation measures. So there are measures for us to be able to determine, are students generalizing their skills into other settings. So we can use algebra measures as well to help us determine that. So, and you can find some of her work through a search in your search bar. We'll often say that it's important for us to match the intensity of our instruction to the intensity of need. Well, that's also true with our progress monitoring. The intensity of our the needs of our students. More intense students with a higher intensity of needs, I should say, do require a higher intensity of assessment. So certainly those students who are at that accuracy and fluency level, about every 2 weeks, we're going to want to be able to pull information on, are we starting to see growth over the course of time? In comprehension measures, we would measure those about every 4 weeks. So we're starting to see our students being able to, is what we're doing working? Is progress being made? When you come together to have some of these discussions, which is what this part 3 is all about, the order of the information that you would start to look at is a little different between reading and math. In reading, we would start with those progress monitoring pieces, those curriculum-based measures, the oral reading fluency or the maze comprehension measures. Then some mastery data from the intervention. So I'm teaching them multisyllabic words. Are they doing better at multisyllabic words? And then I would also want to have that information around, well, how are they doing in class? What are we seeing from the class itself? In math, it's a slightly different order because our progress monitoring data is a little more general and not quite as strong statistically. So the first piece of information I would use within math is to start to look at how are students doing? Are they learning that intervention skill? So we might be intervening and reaching back on the standards, and we're teaching students a division, and then so how are they doing around division? And then in the core class, we might be working on fractions. And as fractions relate to division, are we starting to see a greater understanding of students' understanding of fractions, decimals, and percents? And so is it starting to generalize within the classroom? Are we continuing the students down that road? And then also pulling in our progress monitoring data as a way to continue to triangulate the data. So having a variety of sources is really important at our secondary level to be able to take from our assessment protocol, have clear pieces of what does it mean are students successful, or is what we're doing not working, and being able to have those discussions. And when people come together, they know what pieces of data they're supposed to bring in order to make those conversations work really well. Progress monitoring is tricky, and often it's the devil's in the details here, and that's what kind of has people start to get confused and start to struggle with progress monitoring. So setting up really clear progress monitoring systems. So who's going to deliver that? Is that the person who is giving the intervention? Is there an additional person within your school? A reading specialist? Some schools have instructional coaches who would provide that. Is that the role of the core classroom teacher? Really being clear about who is it that gives that. Paraprofessionals and some of our secondary schools may be able to provide that just having this is that person's role, so that they know that is when they're supposed to do it. When we think about our students who are in need, part of this is just have a clear calendar. And then the more intensive, as I said, it could be every week or 2 times per month. And this is particularly for those students in decoding. We might need to be checking in even more frequently. If we're really, really intense about that level of intervention that a student's receiving, then we want to be really intense about the assessments to make sure that students, we're matching that need with the level of intensity. So those students who are really high level of need are going to be receiving more intensive progress monitoring, because we're going to be making higher stakes decisions around that. Then the question about where that progress monitoring will occur. Just having a discussion this week with a school saying, well, it's happening in the hall and it's a little noisy out there. And being able to have, who's bringing those materials? Is this happening in the lunchroom? Is there someone setting up the tables in the cafeteria? So being clear about where those pieces, because it may be somebody else, it might be a multitude of people who are giving that assessment. and then really knowing where those materials will be kept. It's really important to avoid trying to fatten the chicken by weighing it. And so we don't want to try to take away as much instruction time for progress monitoring. We want to try to really focus and be targeted. That's where the calendar starts to help, to avoid that direct instruction for progress monitoring. So some schools, and again, this is something that each school will have to work out their own system for progress monitoring. But just this week, where a school said, wow, the students are being pulled out of my math class every Tuesday, and they're missing this instruction, and 5 or 6 students are being pulled out for progress monitoring. Not the best system. Instead, we might try, well, if it's 5 or 6 students, let's do 1 student on Monday, another student on Tuesday, and then they're only missing 2 or 3 minutes rather than a group of students being pulled out and missing an entire chunk of time. So it really depends. Some schools have a late start or an early release, and that modifies their schedule, and that means that there is a time where we could pull them together. Some schools might have a guidance or a house or a time at the beginning of the day or at the end of the day where students could receive their progress monitoring. So it's really looking deeply at your schedule, finding those times where students can be pulled and be given that progress monitoring. And then you want to be able to figure out how you're going to start to collect that data. So once you have collected it, how are you going to put it into a database so that that data can be used for students' decision making? So how are we going to graph it? Who's going to enter the data? And where is it going to be kept, so that when it's time to have your discussion about is this working, where do we go to bring that information together? Progress monitoring really requires a lot of logistics and can be something that a lot of schools fall down on because they're not sure about how to put all those pieces together, and because typically we want to have conversations around mastery data instead. Great, we want to keep those as part of it, but it's really important to include that progress monitoring data, to work through the logistics and make sure that our progress monitoring data is there so that we can start to have some focused and targeted conversations. And the reason is that we're going to move to this idea of decision rules. Our progress monitoring is the piece that really provides us the clear guidance of the ways that we start to use that progress monitoring data. So Atul Gawande had done he is a Harvard physician and studies systems, wrote a great book called The Checklist Manifesto around looking at all these different systems, and he incorporated a checklist around surgeries that dramatically reduced the secondary infections. But that idea goes back to that, what he found in looking at lots and lots of different types of systems, is one of the things that is really important is that first piece is the ability to know success and failure. So being able to identify before we come together, well, what does it mean to be successful, and what does it mean if it is not working, that we have agreements around those pieces. So really that first piece, the number one thing that strong systems have in place is they know how to determine success and how to say, you know what, this is not working whatsoever. So when we think about decision rules, they really cause us to do these things. They cause us first to pause. That it is, sometimes I call them tripwires. What is it that's going to cause us, we look at the data and say, whoa, we need to stop here and pause and then analyze. We need to look a little deeper at this student. And so we've paused, we've analyzed, and then we come up with a response. And so decision rules are the things they're the tripwires, they're the triggers that have us stop, look a little deeper, and then come up with a solution about something that we need to do differently for the student. So they start to guide on this quest to determine, is that what we are doing working? So not is what the interventionist doing working, but is what we as a school system, are we providing the supports for these children, for them to be successful? So, and that should be consistent across schools and larger systems, or across different houses or different grade levels, different teams, that there is some level of consistency about these determination of success and failure. So then those decision rules will help us say, okay, this student we need to intensify some more, or this student's ready to exit from our intervention program. Because when we think about this idea of having these conversations, it won't be successful if we say students who are struggling, who are our most fragile learners in our secondary systems, they're going to get an intervention for one semester and then they're out. Well, if that semester doesn't do it, if they are still struggling at the end of that time, and we aren't looking back and having a lens to look back through, then that is not a great intervention system if we do something, but we never look to determine whether it worked or not. And that's true for any of our interventions at the attendance, behavior, academic. And so constructing decision rules all the way around is we want to be able to determine success and say, well, we might need to do something different for this student. And we don't want to just set them free and have them not have the full option of graduation because they don't have the skills. So decision rules are set by, they might be slightly different on the pieces that you use in between a middle and a high school, but having some idea of an aim line. And by aim line, I mean, this is a point from where the student starts to where the student may exit. What is the goal of your progress monitoring data, the goal of your mastery data? What is success? And sharing that information with the students and saying, are they making growth to that point? And I'll show an aim line here in a little while. And then what happens if that data sort of bounces all over the place? What is the guidance, and how might you look at the trend of students over time? Do we see overall that students are increasing in their skills? Are they staying flat in their skills? Or we hope that they are not declining in their skills as a result of the intervention. So certainly, if students are declining or staying flat, if our intervention is not accelerating learning for students, then that is not going to be successful. So picking a chunk of time within your schools, this will also depend on how long your semesters or trimesters or semesters, quarters, depending on how frequently your students change classes. You're going to want to check in the middle of that time, and then at the end of that time to determine whether that student is going to be continuing within the intervention class or whether they're going to be out, or we need to switch the focus for students upon that. So we'll take a look at some of those examples. But it's also, interventions are not designed to be permanent. So what is the success? Sharing that success with students, saying, here's where you got to be, here's how you're going to be able to get this another elective back, or whatever it is, that however your structures are set up for your interventions. But sharing those decision rules is a really important piece. So I often say that RTI is TIR, and that means that thinking is required. So decision rules it's a very ominous type of term, but really what that means is it provides that structure of how do we bring our brains to this conversation. So they're really these triggers. We pause, we analyze, and we respond. And that's why it's best to have a group of people on this discussion to determine what is the need for this student or this group of students in order for them to be successful. One of the ways that you can do that is to look at cohort data, or students who are all in that third period reading class, that are all receiving this rewards curriculum. But we also might want to be able to compare the students to other students who are, like, how does the student compare to other students in interventions? We might want to look at, well, this student is a second language or third language learner, and we might want to look at, well, what level is this student, and are they starting to make some growth as well? So looking at groups of students is a really effective way in having some decision rules around if a group isn't working out well, then we need to think about how can we provide that support. So as an example, if we saw here's Adrian, and so this is the aimline here. You can see that that is where some students would begin, but we want them to be up there at that high point. That's where we see success. So if this is Adrian, and we might have a few other students, and we'll pull a sample of the students who are also in the same class, and wow, this intervention is working really, really well for all these other students, then we should probably have a conversation about what's, like, because this is not working for Adrian, and we need to make a change for that student. That's going to be really important because we see growth for others. And in fact, for some, they're so close, they might even be able to be out of this intervention. So we need to have a deep conversation about this one student. Conversely, and the power of looking at cohort data and having decision rules around that is if our data look like this, then our problem is we need to be, that is not a conversation, this conversation is no longer about Adrian. This conversation is about this group of students. We're not going to talk about Amy, Isaiah, Adrian, and Mary, one student at a time. Instead, we're going to say, and looking at our decision rules and say, this is not working. We need to stop doing what we're doing and find ways to accelerate the student learning. And that is not happening with what we're doing right now. Our goal is always to accelerate student learning to be able to get them to that high level of success. So as an example, those are the things that would cause us to pause. If we said, here's this this group level data, we're going to pause and we're going to look at the group data. Or we might say we're going to pause. It's like, wow, here's some data. The goal might be 120 words, and the first time that we gave, so this is a student who's in an intervention, and we said that the student had 67 on the first probe, 70 on the next probe, and as we read down over the course of all of those probes. And so we might ask this question, is this intervention successful? Well, as we analyze at the student level data, we can see that over the course of, if we're checking in on this over the course of 12 weeks or 10 weeks, or depending on how frequently these measures were given, this student has only gained a few words on their rate. But we really want to be analyzing. And so we might then say, well, if this were an intervention that was focused on the word level, then we might want to go and say, well, our goal is to have 95% accuracy. We could ask this question again, is this intervention successful? And absolutely, this intervention is successful. So we have to analyze, and this goes back to that idea that we've talked about before of making sure that we're connecting the target of the intervention to the target of the progress monitoring. So this intervention is working out quite well. The accuracy over the course of these 12 weeks has gone up dramatically. And the student has increased a little bit on the rate, but that hasn't been what we've been working on. And in fact, we wouldn't want rate to increase if accuracy suffered. So we can analyze this individual data and start to determine, like, yes, this intervention is working pretty well, rather than at that first, if we just used the rate only, it would not be. So we've paused. That we might say, that doesn't look like things have improved. Then as we start to analyze, then we can move through. And this might be a student, depending on what we're going to do is now shift the focus of the intervention to more of a rate and fluency with rereading and prosody to be able to help them continue down the road. So we filled that first pothole that's in the students' learning around accuracy, and now we're going to move to the next pothole that is on rate. So when we start to analyze that data, we paused. So that's the decision rules. Decision rules are generally pretty simple, and we might say that those students are below the aim line, and then, well, now they're below the aim line, let's analyze a little bit more. So we can look at that progress monitoring data, but there's also other pieces of information that we would want to bring in. So intervention data is going to be a part of that as well. So how are they doing on those skills that you're being taught? The one piece that's not on here that I think would also be really important is that those core pieces of assessments. How'd they do on that latest social studies assignment? How'd they do on that science quiz? Bringing in other pieces that are a part of that as well. You can bring in, but cold, it might be a while back, but then being able to look here at the diagnostic assessments as well. We might need to dig in a little bit deeper and see, this hasn't worked real well. Maybe we have the student placed in the wrong intervention. And that's where, going back to part 2, we might need to take a look at for students. And then we start to think about how we're going to respond. So again, that diagnostic data may be necessary, but then we might start to look at those instructional variables. Remember, those instructional variables are, we go to that acronym of ICE: instruction, curriculum, and environment. So those are the things that we can control and to be able to help. And then don't forget, exiting students might also be an appropriate response as well. So when we start thinking about those ideas of what we can control around our students, this table is often really insightful for a lot of folks when we start thinking about those things that are within the student versus external to the student. We can't control much of the things that are internal to the student. We can't control their desire to learn or their skills as they are now. What we can do is to help improve those skills. And those things are all alterable. We can affect those things. So some of those things that are within the student that are hard to change, and we're pretty good about those conversations. Often we don't dig too deep into those pieces. But often we spend a whole bunch of time having these conversations that are external to the student and hard to change. And often the student can't control them and we can't control them. So when we start thinking about those things like mobility, or, oh, if the family would only this or that, or you should meet their brother, those pieces, we can't control those. And so we keep our conversations to those things that we can change, that are alterable and external to the student. And so those things are that quality of the instruction, the quality of the curriculum, the quality of the environment, having good assessment systems, and that time and the content, what we're delivering for them, to be really, really good, so that we spend time in that upper right-hand side and not in that lower left-hand side, because we can't control those things. So when we start talking about the response, we can't respond to the mobility that a student has had in the past. What we can do is start thinking about, well, how do we provide environmental supports to help the student come and stay and be in school? We can do some things to support students that way. So we avoid that lower piece and talk about that upper piece. When we think about RTI as well, remember that the goal is that we want them to be able to move out and to be able to not be in interventions forever. So a student who is not on an IEP, who is in an intervention forever, that is where a lot of schools have gotten in trouble around the idea of child find. You want to be able to have these clear decision rules that trigger us to be able to say, this student has been in here, we need to for a long time and hasn't been making growth. We need to be able to help accelerate them. And so it's that acceleration closer. We're giving them more than what most students get, so their growth should be more than what most students get. So we don't want the ninth grader to master fifth grade in ninth grade, and then move on to 10th grade and hope that they get through 6th grade content. We want to be able to accelerate that and eventually be able to move students out of interventions. And so when we start thinking about the group level interventions, we're going to come together and have some meetings. It's going to be this next section we'll talk about here. We want to have our decision rules start to say, well, we're going to modify this intervention. Is this for the group? Remember the slide that had the pictures and everybody in that group was below the aim line, or for the individual? And that one was where the other students were doing pretty well, but this student was not. So we need to think about how do we modify, intensify for the group. Or are there students who are ready to be out and they're free, and we might need to think about their schedule either for this trimester or the next. And then being able to modify, or are we just looking at the individual student, or to intensify for the individual? So by that, I mean things like this. So if we're going to continue those interventions, what does success look like? Meaning that this student is making success. They are moving forward. We are accelerating them, but they are not yet there. So as the example here, this student looking at that progress monitoring data, on track to meet the goal, is above the aim line, but he's not where we want him to be. We're going to continue with what we're doing. We're not going to make any adjustments, and we're going to just keep moving forward because we predict that this intervention and core in combination are going to help this student be where we hope that they can get to. Versus the modify or intensify. So we're going to be able to make some sort of change. So as an example here with the same student of Charlie, not making progress towards the goal, not going to get there where we hope that they would be. So we're going to give a little less time on the computer because there's some distributed practice that Charlie's getting on the computer time. He's going to get less of that and now more time in group instruction. So we're making that shift. Or conversely, looking at Charlie's data, and we've been focusing on this comprehension component, but there's not any growth there. But really, it looks like we placed that student inappropriately on our end as adults, and we're going to switch to accuracy and decoding instead. We've learned a little bit more about the student since we've put them into this intervention, and now we're going to be able to help them and really target. We're going to fill that pothole as it moves along. When we think about that change of intervention, so it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to wholly change at some intervention program, one of those evidence-based programs, but it's instead we're going to change the intensity of it. So we might be more intense about our instruction or more intense about the environment. We might have a behavior plan that we put in place that will provide some external motivation for students to be able to engage in the content. So there's lots of different ways that we can think about that. How do we up that intensity for our students and count that as a way that we make that change to the intervention? And then there's, again, sharing those exit rules with students to say, oh, here's Charlie. He's making growth on Maze. He's also doing well in all of his classes. He's going to have a new semester, and we're going to have him we're going to move him into a study hall. At this point, some schools will move students into study halls right in the middle of the semester. Again, it's going to depend on your situation. And some of those are like, we get new students all the time. Some schools will even move students into whole new classes in the middle of a semester, trimester, quarter. But it's really, being clear with students, here's how you get out. And once students get there, have a plan for them when they are ready to exit. So all of these conversations start to happen around this idea when we're going to come together and have an intervention review meeting. So this is where a group of people come together, and it will be determined by your school setting. Sometimes it is a RTI MTSS leadership team that comes together. Sometimes it's the interventionist with groups of teachers that all see similar students within a house system, or It might be department chairs come together. Happens differently at different schools, and that will be one of the things that you will want to determine. But at some point, once during the middle of instruction and once before the end of your grading period, you'll at least twice, you'll want to have people come together to answer this question. Is what we're doing working? Or do we need to continue it? Do we need to exit the student from it? Or do we need to modify as a result of what our data is suggesting? So this comes around where we've used this assessment funnel and we pull those progress monitoring and mastery level assessments. And you've sort of seen some of those as examples of those questions around that student of Charlie to start to see, well, what is it that that student, how is that student responding to the intervention, RTI? How are they responding to that instruction, RTI? And using that data, and this is why it's important to have those standardized measures of progress monitoring so that our decision rules will trigger our conversations around what it is that we need to do, who do we need to pause, who do we need to analyze, and who do we need to respond? How do we start to look at those pieces? So within this intervention review meeting, you're going to have that data. People are going to know what data that they are supposed to bring. What are the mastery assessments that we want to have conversations around? And then that's where we apply those decision rules together to start to determine, is what we're doing working? Do we need to make a change? Do we need to exit? Do we need to continue our intervention? We don't want kids to fall through the cracks. We don't want to just say, you know, this kid was in an intervention for a semester and now they're out. If they still are struggling learners, then we need to continue to provide them the supports necessary in order to be successful. And we want to avoid these conversations, well, I think he's going to be okay. So when you start to hear conversations like that, I feel like this kid's really ready to take off. The follow-up question that you can have is, well, what data do you have that suggests that? What are you using to make that determination? And so often we can lead with our guts, but we want our head in order to be able to back us up and to be able to say, well, here's the steps that I think that we need to do as a result. And we don't, again, want kids to stay in interventions forever. That's not the goal of an RTI MTSS system. So one of the handouts that you'll see, it's available, that goes along with this video, is an agenda where you can start to take a look at going through, so what is that problem identification? So is this a group problem or is this an individual problem? So on the side of the first page, we have that group, that problem identification, and we start to sort out, are there students, is there no longer a problem? We're ready to exit some students. Or with group problem analysis and group plan development. That was that second, when I showed the aimline slide there, that was the group that said, yes, you know, we need to really make a new plan for this group. On the back side of this is a more individual problem analysis and individual student problem plan development. So you don't need to make a plan for every single student if your intervention is not working. And so if your intervention's not working and you're sort of at that 50% of this class this intervention isn't successful for, then you might want to be thinking about that at the group level instead. But having this clear agenda will make these meetings efficient and effective, pulling in multiple sources of data, using those decision rules that are triggered by our progress monitoring data will be really systematic in how these conversations start to go. So once again, thank you for participating here in part 3 of our video series on secondary systems at the intervention level. There is a check for understanding document that is attached in here. You can always fill that out with a group or individually. When you have completed it, please email it to Elena Gee at the State Department. Her email is here on the slide. And once again, I'm Dean Richards, and if you ever have any questions, please feel free to email me. I am happy to have those conversations with you and to continue to extend this conversation. So I appreciate you being a part of this series. Again, part one was that whole idea of really having clear interventions. Part two being the idea of that we're placing the right students in the right interventions. And then part three is once students are in interventions, using progress monitoring and your mastery data and applying the decision rules to them in order to have great discussions about our students. So I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.